Content warning: discussion of gaslighting, emotional abuse, and trauma. Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories is somewhat infamous in the Kingdom Hearts community for not only starting the trend of Kingdom Hearts games appearing as exclusives across almost every handheld and console, but also for completely overhauling the game's combat system and turning it from a straightforward 3D action RPG into a weird, obtuse hybrid of action RPG mechanics with a complex and confusing collectible card game centered around obtaining cards and deck building, all wrapped up in a visual bow mixing top-down isometric and faux 3D for the Game Boy Advance. I sucked at this game when I was a kid. In fact, I remember struggling with this system so much that rather than attempt to beat the game legitimately, I just loaded a bunch of action replay codes into the game about halfway through and marched my way through the rest of the encounters to try and finish the story. And I don't know if you've ever loaded up cheat codes into a game like this before, but if you haven't, doing so can make a game you already don't care for feel so lifeless and boring that you start to actively hate it. And I was already starting to hate Chain of Memories due to its seemingly atrocious and insurmountable difficulty. So imagine my surprise when, an hour into the remake of Memories, I was already having a blast and loving the deck building system even more than I loved the ability system of Kingdom Hearts 1. That's a bit blasphemous to most Kingdom Hearts fans, but it's true, and I'm not even sure I like any of the other games' combat more than Chain of Memories because of just how much fun I had with the deck building system. What gets me most about my changed feelings, though, is that even being remade in 3D for the PS2 didn't change much about the game. I was the one who changed, partly by growing up and getting better at video games, but more importantly, by learning to appreciate the elements of this game's design in a way I didn't as a small girl. Chain of Memories' collectible card conceit is based on our heroes traversing Castle Oblivion, where everything is ruled by collectible cards, including standard Keyblade attacks, magical spells, and restorative items. Each card is assigned a value of 0 through 9, and if you or an opponent use a card with a higher number than each other, the higher card will break the lower card, leaving the person with the lower card stunned and vulnerable to attack. The only exception to this card hierarchy are the 0 cards, which can break any card if played last, but are broken by any card if played first. You can also stock 3 cards together at once, and stocking particular combinations of cards can trigger special abilities called slights, which range from basic spell upgrades like Blizzara and Blizzaga to more powerful moves like Sonic Blade, Ragnarok, and Holy. These cards all come from a deck you build, with the only restrictions being which cards you've collected throughout the game, the number of card points each card costs, and your maximum card point limit, which you can increase as you level up. If you use up all your cards during combat, you can reload most of your deck as many times as you need, but it takes longer to reload each time you do so, and you can't reload the first card used in any slight or some specific types of cards. You also eventually unlock one-time use cards that reload all cards, including normally unreloadable cards, and they tend to be key in the late game, as you need to rely on slights to get past late game enemies, and losing each slight after a single use is pretty unsustainable for longer boss battles. These mechanics end up feeling quite deep, they allow a lot of room for creativity, and they're incredibly rewarding to sink your teeth into. If you put a decent amount of effort into building your deck, the game will allow you to wipe the floor with most enemies and bosses, and it was through playing with and exploring these mechanics that I was able to find a lot to love in Chain of Memories gameplay, despite my issues with it the first time around. I can't solely take the credit for finding what I love about this game on my own though, because I had help from a number of places. The first and most obvious one was my discovery of Magic the Gathering, which taught me the joy of deck building. The second was the Soulsborne series, which taught me that cheese or cheap strategies are not only valid, but often very fun to find and execute. And the third was the RPG Limit Break speedrun of Chain of Memories, as the runner's explanations of how to optimize your deck taught me a lot of the specifics for how to approach the game's mechanics. But as much as I've learned to appreciate this game, the fact that I needed so much help and external influence to find a genuine love for it brings me to my biggest criticism of it. For all the depth and complexity present in Chain of Memories card mechanics, it doesn't do a very good job of teaching you those mechanics, or more importantly, how it expects you to engage with those mechanics at all. There's never a point in the game where you're encouraged to experiment with customizing your deck, or any kind of helpful hints section to give you any tips or tricks for constructing a solid deck. In fact, Chain of Memories does such a poor job of teaching you how to engage with its deck building and card combat that it almost feels like the developers were so familiar with the mechanics of collectible card games that they didn't recognize how dense and inaccessible their mechanics can be to an outsider. Chain of Memories does open with a tutorial that teaches you the basics of how card combat works, and if you're familiar with collectible card games and the onus they place on deck building, you'll probably be good to go from there. But without that context, you likely won't see that the tutorial only teaches you how its mechanics differ from other collectible card games, and not any of the staples of the genre that it draws upon. The complete lack of context to its card game mechanics also sets you up for a hell of a challenge, because Chain of Memories is tough as nails, even on the lower difficulties. What makes it so difficult is the result of a bunch of subtle settings that put enemies on fairly equal ground with you as a player. The timing for dodging most enemy attacks is very tight, it's relatively easy to get stun locked or caught in a loop of enemy attacks, and when an enemy breaks your card with a card of a higher value, they're almost always able to land that attack and deal a significant amount of damage to you. These are the kind of minor details that would make a standard action game infamous for having a brutal difficulty, but each of these advantages enemies have over you can be turned against them as well. It's almost impossible for an enemy or boss to dodge your attack outright. It can be quite easy to stun lock enemies and bosses using certain sleights, and when you break an enemy card, your attack almost always lands too and deals a good amount of damage. And when you consider how thoroughly Chain of Memories will let you break it when you heavily optimize your deck, these advantages are almost completely negligible for enemies, and yet another boon to you as a player. There are so many ways to crack this game open, in fact, that I suspect that during development, everyone playtesting and designing the game were familiar enough with deck building to have no trouble optimizing their decks and wiping the floor with most bosses and regular enemies, which probably led the developers to tweak their systems to account for that, which means these brutal design choices are choices that they came to reasonably, just to give the enemies a fighting chance, no matter how difficult that might make the game for a less genre-savvy player. By not accounting for the less genre-savvy players in the audience, though, they left behind a significant part of their audience, including me when I was young. And the fact of the matter is, no matter how good and competent I am at this game now, it's extremely easy to see the ways in which it is nearly unapproachable for someone who isn't used to both high-level action games and collectible card games. Something that I feel the need to point out Kingdom Hearts 1 was neither of. In spite of all of my issues with Kingdom Hearts 1's gameplay and design, there was a certain level of simplicity to it. Booting up and playing through Kingdom Hearts 1 is like starting an MMO at level 1. You start out with just a few skills, just a few easy quests, and you don't have to master any complicated systems right off the bat to enjoy it. The game will slowly introduce new mechanics to increase the complexity, but it does so at a pace that feels quite natural and satisfying, and you never feel like you're getting too overwhelmed with the number of options you have in combat. Chain of Memories, then, is like starting an MMO for the first time by creating a character at the max level. Now, sure, if you're an experienced player and a veteran of other MMO games, you're probably going to be able to adjust. Most MMOs aren't that different in their fundamental design after all, and you can probably just hop over to a wiki page and you're good to go. But if you don't have that background of experience, starting out as a character this high level will be completely overwhelming. The number of abilities that you have, the number of different traits and modifiers you can select, it's a lot of stuff. Stuff that is meant to be introduced to you over the course of 40 hours. And Chain of Memories introduces you to all of that complexity in 5 to 10 minutes, and expects you to be able to proceed from there. Admittedly, Chain of Memories isn't quite as complicated in how its deck building works as playing a high-level character in an MMO is, but the fact that it expects you to be able to seamlessly blend action game skills with building a deck and navigating that deck in the middle of battle is a tall fucking order. I think that there is a certain level of simplicity to Chain of Memories that makes it easier for me to approach the game's complex as Magic the Gathering. For one, in Chain of Memories, the number of enemy abilities that are out there is fairly limited. Most normal enemies act in predictable patterns that you'll recognize if you fought them in Kingdom Hearts 1, and the same can be said for most of the bosses, since the game does reuse a lot of the bosses from the original game. But even with that in mind, the unique bosses all follow fairly predictable patterns too. And after a little bit of trial and error, it's pretty easy to figure out what kind of moves they're going to pull off and what kind of attacks you need to be looking out for and ready to counter. This isn't to deny the difficulty of navigating a collectible card game in real-time combat, but one thing that Chain of Memories doesn't teach you, but is quite simple when you actually think about it, is that you can organize your deck in a specific order ahead of time. And doing so makes it a lot easier to know where specific cards in your deck are. And when you're playing like this, it's not a constant hunt for cards to counter an enemy, it's simply moving back and forth between different options of cards for different situations. And for each boss, you can program your deck to plan ahead to a spectacular degree. This in and of itself isn't something that's necessarily intuitive from playing the game on your own. But once you pick it up, the rest of the game does become a lot easier, and I think that's why I'm ultimately able to forgive its overcomplexity. There's so much room to explore in that space, and the feeling that ultimately comes from that experience of experimenting with the game's complex mechanics and figuring out something special, something that will allow you to break through a difficult challenge, is something that I love. Every single boss is a puzzle to be solved. And once you figure out the way in which you're supposed to interact with that boss, and what mechanics you can use to give yourself the advantage, the game just opens up into a wide realm of possibilities for you to explore. Beyond the card combat, though, another criticism I have of this game is the overall weakness of its level design, which, if you've played it, you'll already know is a bit of a stretch to even call its levels designed in the traditional sense. Each floor of the castle has a grid-like layout that determines which rooms connect to the other, but the individual rooms themselves all can change based on the map card you use to generate it. And no matter the theme of the world or what floor of the castle you're on, these rooms will always be laid out the same if you use the same card to generate it. This is a gameplay conceit that makes sense in the context of Chain of Memories' origin. As a Game Boy Advance game designed with portable gameplay and limited storage in mind, wouldn't be brought down by reusing room layouts, since your play sessions are going to be shorter and the GBA itself can only contain so much variety. But even if this design worked well in theory for a handheld game, it doesn't translate well to a standalone console game at all, where if you spend more than a couple of hours at a time playing, you will naturally memorize the room layouts tied to each map card, as well as the enemy and item placements in that room. You can skip over the room and move right past the enemies if you need to, but if it's your first time playing, some level grinding and map card grinding is likely inevitable, meaning you'll be seeing the same room layouts over and over and over again, with the only change being a few additional room types that get added halfway into the game. My biggest gripe with this system, though, isn't in its own failing, but in its wasted potential. Using cards to generate rooms with specific properties as you proceed is kind of a brilliant idea. This system allows you to grind through rooms filled with enemies, visit a shop, access extra treasure, or save the game just about wherever you want. And it almost plays perfectly. Like, it's so close to feeling like a completely novel and interesting way to approach level design, especially at the beginning of the game. What brings it down, though, is that there is absolutely no variety in the layouts generated by each map card. No matter what floor you are on, or what Disney World you're supposed to be exploring, the layout of every room is the exact same layout it was on every other floor and world you've been to, as long as you use the same map card. That bit of design, no matter how small and sensical it might be, leads to a ton of level fatigue, as you're forced to trek through the same rooms over and over again, with the only changes from world to world being the textures and art design from each Disney World being layered over the room. And these retextures don't even feel that bad. I'm consistently impressed with how effectively the designers were able to make each world feel like it's Disney World, simply by changing the specifics of a few objects and textures around the map. No matter how distinct each world feels, though, that level fatigue will eventually settle in no matter what. I certainly felt it on my first playthrough, and even started feeling it on my second playthrough a couple years later, despite knowing about the reused room layouts going in. What probably gets under my skin the most, though, is that I don't even think this fatigue would be that hard to fix. If they had made it so different floors and different Disney worlds had alternate layouts for most map cards, that fatigue would be almost entirely eliminated. Even with all of its flaws though, I still love Chain of Memories, and I do want that to be clear. Say what you will about Tetsuya Nomura, but it takes a bit of a mad genius to try blending an action RPG with a collectible card game that throws out traditional level design in favor of something very roguelike. And I can't help but respect the decision to shake the series' mechanics up so thoroughly, whether the execution worked perfectly or not. I think it's genuinely quite beautiful to play through a game that encourages you to break, manipulate, and abuse it through each and every mechanic, and I don't think I've ever been happier to prove that my 12-year-old self's opinion was completely wrong. As much as I enjoyed the game's mechanics and design though, the design didn't appeal to me nearly as much as the game's story, because, goddess grace, Chain of Memories has a compelling and meaningful story. It intentionally strips down the larger and grander story elements from the original game, and instead focuses on an intimate narrative that challenges Sora as a character in a way that no other game has done as effectively since. Picking up right at the end of Kingdom Hearts 1, Sora, Donald, and Goofy are stuck in limbo between the realms of light and darkness, searching for Riku and King Mickey. Sora wakes up in the middle of the night during their search and is drawn down a path to Castle Oblivion by a black hooded figure. Sora and his friends were all drawn here by a collective instinct that they would find Mickey here, but before they have time to process this, they're confronted by the same hooded figure who first drew Sora into the castle, and learn that the castle has wiped away all their skills and abilities. The figure then passes through Sora, sampling his memory, and gives Sora a card that will allow him to visit a world from his memories inside the castle.
In this place to find is to lose, and to lose is to find. That is the way in Castle Oblivion.
Castle Oblivion?
Here you will meet people that you have known in the past, and you will meet people you miss, to reunite with those you hold dear.
What's this? A card?
It is a promise for the reunion you seek. Proceed, Sora. To lose and claim anew, or to claim anew only to lose.
Sora uses it to create a replica of Traverse Town, and as Sora enters it, the figure teaches him that Castle Oblivion is entirely ruled by these cards, as well as the basic mechanics for card battles and exploration that will be used throughout the game. We also learn that in Castle Oblivion, Sora can only call on his friends by picking up and using a friend card, which randomly drop during battle, and this serves to isolate Sora mechanically from his friends, which thematically reinforces that he's being left to face the dangers of the castle almost entirely alone. This opening is genuinely excellent and does a fantastic job of drawing us into the game's story with a compelling mystery, clear motivation for Sora, and grounded stakes, as memory loss is just as terrifying to our characters as it is for us in the real world. There is also a massive leap in the quality of animation, cinematography, and acting in the cutscenes for the remake of this game, compared to both the original Kingdom Hearts and Kingdom Hearts 2, which were produced before this remake was created. In particular, Haley Joel Osment has matured as an actor, and he does a great job of grounding his performance in the pain, frustration, and anger that Sora would no doubt be feeling at the thought of a friend in peril. The only critique of his performance I have is that it is somewhat difficult to clear the hurdle of Osment's newer, deeper voice, especially when that voice is placed on top of the Sora who doesn't look a day older than he was at the end of Kingdom Hearts 1. But that hurdle is hardly Osment's fault, and more an issue with the developers deciding not to age up his model to appear more like his older self, which would have helped a lot in that regard, even if it meant sacrificing a perfect continuity in the process. Osment's performance on its own is easy to see for the brilliant work it is though, and it wisely is the foundation that the rest of this story stands upon.
She was quiet and always drawing. When we'd go to the beach, she'd draw a picture instead of swimming. Sometimes she'd draw us too. She was really good. I remember Riku and I fighting over who she'd draw next. But one day, she was gone, just like that. I remember crying after she was gone. But that's all. I still don't remember her name.
In the replica of Traverse Town, Sora meets up with Leon, Yuffie, and Aerith, who all claim to have never met Sora, yet somehow instinctually know his name, which Sora eventually figures out is due to them being replicas of his friends based on his memories, and thus tied to him even if they have not met him. It is simultaneously eerie and funny to watch Sora interact with his friends who are clueless about who he is. And the best moment of this is when we get to see Sora try to convince a very flustered Leon that it's not weird for him to know the name of a kid he's never met before. The rest of Traverse Town is spent catching up with a few more Final Fantasy characters and defeating Guard Armor. After conquering the boss, Sora and his friends come to terms with the idea that the people they meet in Castle Oblivion won't recognize them, and decide to proceed through the rest of the castle without giving the strangeness much thought, no matter how much dissonance it might introduce to any future world's plot. Before Sora leaves, though, he's stopped by Aerith, who recognizes that she herself and the rest of Traverse Town are just a figment created by the castle and his memories.
What's up?
I don't have all the answers, but I had to tell you something. Your memories created this town, right?
That's what the guy who gave me the card said.
If that's true, then this town is just a figment of your mind, and so are we.
But you can't be a figment. You're standing right here. The town is here too.
But I'm not really me. I don't remember things I should, and I sense things I shouldn't. Sora, beware of your memories. In the journey to come, you'll be faced with more illusions. Sometimes the shadows of your memories will deceive you, try to lead you astray.
So, what exactly does that mean?
I'm sorry, I'm just another illusion. The truth is out of my reach.
Don't say stuff like that. It's depressing.
Stay strong, Sora. Don't let the illusions distract you from what's truly important.
But before she can give Sora any more advice, Donald and Goofy call out to Sora and Aerith disappears, with Donald and Goofy not having seen her there talking to Sora at all. This short interaction between Sora and Aerith is the last bit of setup for the greater story we receive, and it serves to further the theme of being unable to trust your memory and perceptions that the game will develop as it goes. It also foreshadows how Sora will be tested, as Aerith's warning not to trust the illusions of friendship created by the castle challenged Sora's core motivation, to trust and fight for his friends. From here, the story alternates between revisiting the Disney World Sora visited in the first game and short scenes set in the halls of Castle Oblivion, and, unfortunately, the stories of the Disney Worlds don't quite rise to the level of quality of the story told throughout the castle. With only a couple of exceptions, most of the Disney Worlds simply tell condensed versions of the stories told in the original Kingdom Hearts, and only a handful make even superficial changes to use memory as a theme. But even if they don't reach the heights of the story told in the halls of Castle Oblivion, most of the worlds end up offering a more compelling version of the original world's story, partly thanks to the necessity of truncating them into 3 or 4 short scenes at most, due to the structure of the castle's levels, and partly thanks to most of them being refocused on providing the Disney characters with satisfying motivations and character arcs, both of which were frequently absent from Kingdom Hearts 1. The most impressive thing about these Disney worlds, though, is how effectively they're able to capture the personalities and motivations of the Disney characters within through the limited blocking, animation, and dialogue text in their cutscenes. This is something Kingdom Hearts 1 specifically struggled with, as much of the character in these characters was often lost in the scenes using dialogue boxes. That game even bafflingly struggled to display Donald and Goofy's character through dialogue boxes, and their iconic dialogue tics and personalities are things you'd expect to be easy to capture in a dialogue box. In Chain of Memories, though, every character retains their unique voice, even in dialogue boxes, and this, in tandem with the stories themselves being shorter, goes a long way in helping keep the repetition of the Disney stories and story beats from feeling repetitive or tiresome. They instead end up feeling fresh and vibrant, ironically, often more so than they did in Kingdom Hearts 1, where they were given the full cinematic cutscene treatment. And that, in tandem with many of the stories being retooled to explore the themes of memories, makes them a lot of fun to play through. Two of these worlds, Wonderland and Halloween Town, have stories that particularly stand out for the way they expand upon the theme of lost memory. Wonderland still has the bones of the story told in the original Kingdom Hearts, where Alice is captured by the Queen of Hearts, Sora tries to rescue her and confronts Trickmaster. Only this time, Alice is accused of having stolen the Queen's memories rather than of trying to steal her heart, and after freeing Alice and defeating Trickmaster, we see the Queen forget all of the events she's seen thus far, except for her inherent distrust for anyone who wanders into her kingdom. With the threat of execution looming over them all, Alice takes advantage of the Queen's memory loss, telling her that she had commanded Sora and his friends to defeat Trickmaster in order to prove their loyalty. The Queen obviously does not remember saying this, both because she didn't say it and because she forgot what happened, but when Alice pushes her, asking if she had forgotten what she told us, the Queen's ego kicks in, and she suddenly remembers giving us that command and commends us for doing her bidding. Now, what Alice does here is called gaslighting, or making someone question their own experiences of past events in order to gain some benefit. And it's an abuse tactic primarily used by an abuser to keep their victims in a state where they are easy to continue abusing. Now, hopefully obviously, Alice gaslighting a murderous, tyrannical queen one time to save her friends' lives is morally justified. But Alice gaslighting the queen like this still leaves an eerie vibe in the game's atmosphere, while also showing just how vulnerable someone can become to manipulation when they have lost or can't trust their memories, which is going to become increasingly relevant to Sora as the game goes on. Even more interesting than that is Halloween Town's story, though, where shortly after arriving, Jack takes Sora to Dr. Finkelstein to investigate the sudden appearance of Heartless in town, and we discover that Finkelstein has been working on a potion designed to unlock the true memories of whoever drinks it. It also happens that the Heartless appeared just after he inhaled a whiff of the potion, but Finkelstein doesn't notice the connection and simply sends us on a quest to help finish it. Before we help Finkelstein finish it though, Oogie Boogie steals the potion for himself, believing that unlocking his true memories will allow him to control the Heartless, since they appeared after Finkelstein smelled it. But after drinking the potion, Oogie becomes completely overwhelmed with dread and terror, seemingly haunted by an invisible figure. We defeat Oogie in this state pretty easily, but when we tell Finkelstein about what the potion did to him, he rebuts Jack's notion that the potion didn't work, and claims that unlocking Oogie's true memories were what caused him to recoil in fear like this. The subtle Lovecraftian undertones of this story are pretty fascinating on their own, what with the scent of knowledge bringing monsters of death and darkness into the world, but the way this story takes that a step further is even more interesting, as it posits that someone unlocking the full extent of their memories in an instant is going to make them have an emotional, if not psychotic, breakdown. This idea taps into a bit of deeper emotional truth about memory as well, and it marks the start of how Kingdom Hearts will be exploring emotional trauma throughout this and the rest of the games. And as someone who has experienced childhood trauma and repressed memories and experiences in order to cope with that trauma, I can pretty safely say that being exposed to the full extent of all my traumatic memories would leave me weak, terrified, and full of anxiety. And, well, it's been a bit since I've had an incident like this, but it doesn't feel like that long ago when I was pushed into experiencing all of the pain from those repressed memories at once. And Oogie's reaction is reasonable, because I don't get scared easily, but the weight of all of that pain and trauma pressing down on me at once, that was the scariest thing that I've ever felt. In fact, if it wasn't for the emotional support I got from my partner when that happened, I don't even want to think about what could have happened to me, or how I could have hurt myself. Sorry, I guess this just kinda hit close to home, and these experiences are really raw for me. But this idea that accessing your true memories can be a painful and harrowing experience is made even more frightening when you consider being unable to access your real memories would make you easy to gaslight, just like the Queen of Hearts. it starts to become much easier to accept the lie that nothing bad is actually happening to you, that your experiences of trauma and pain are invalid, and your life is actually pretty good, because the alternative of facing that trauma, facing that pain, and especially having to face it alone, that's fucking terrifying, and it will shatter your world and leave you changed forever, which is exactly what happens to Sora. As Sora proceeds through the halls of Castle Oblivion, we are forced to watch as he, Donald, and Goofy start to forget very recent memories, with none of them being able to remember the name of Hollow Bastion, even as the similarities between it and Castle Oblivion are clear in their minds. After only a few floors, they've nearly completely forgotten even visiting another castle before, but they still remember one thing clearly: Sora's sacrifice for Kairi. With this in mind, our heroes press on, determined that even if they forget the details of what they've done together, they won't forget each other or the moments that matter the most to them, with Sora specifically clinging to Kairi's good luck charm for this very purpose, confident that he won't forget his promise to return it to her, or how much she means to him. He does forget, though. Around the third floor, as Sora is searching the deepest corners of his memories, trying to solve the mystery of what matters most to him, he sees an image of a young blonde girl in a white gown that he has never seen before. Sora starts to remember more and more about the girl the higher he ascends in the castle. He remembers living with her on Destiny Islands, and after a few floors, he remembers that they were part of a trio of friends with Riku, spending all their time together on the islands before the girl suddenly had to go away. Sora, Riku, and Naminé. Inseparable. These memories are false, and we can see this as players since we're on the outside of Sora. But even as it feels pretty clear that Sora is being manipulated, these memories of Naminé are eerily plausible as part of Sora's backstory that we've just never heard before, making it easy to see why Sora, and more specifically, Donald and Goofy, don't question these revelations. They trust and believe in their friend, after all, even if they do eventually come to sense that these revelations aren't all that they seem to be. Long before that happens, though, it becomes clear that Sora is putting Naminé in the same place of importance where he used to hold Kairi, even though he's yet to ever meet her. Eventually, Sora starts to remember more specific things about her, like how he made a promise to protect her one night when they both sat watching a meteor shower. And at this point, Larxene, an ally of the Cloaked Man from earlier, appears and teases Sora about his difficulty remembering her, the good luck charm she gave him, and his promise to her, eventually sparking Sora to finally remember her name, only for Larxene to reveal that she and her cohorts are keeping Naminé locked deep inside the castle. After the two of them fight, Larxene disappears, leaving Sora swinging his Keyblade aimlessly at the air, no closer to finding his friend, and enraged at Larxene for holding her captive, but more than that, enraged at himself for having forgotten someone who clearly meant so much to him. We may have clued in as players that these memories are false, but they are very real for Sora, and it's heart-wrenching to see Sora's earnestness and desire to protect those close to him turned against him like this.
Where are you? Don't you dare hide from me! Show yourself!
Sora, calm down. She's not coming back.
Sora?
I hate this. Why'd I need someone like that to bring back Naminé's memory?
While the core of Sora's character has been put to the test, we've also been seeing brief scenes of the villains behind Sora's suffering: Larxene, Axel, Vexen, and Marluxia, the leader of these four, as they collaborate in their manipulation of Sora. It's made clear fairly early on that these four are not all necessarily on the same side, and Axel, the fiery redhead assassin, has particularly inscrutable motivations, and seems to be on no one's side but his own. Larxene and Marluxia are far easier to discern though. They are both working together to take power in their organization for themselves by manipulating Sora, though their greater plans for him remain a mystery for now. Vexen has the simplest motivation compared to them. He's the prototypical example of a mad scientist, obsessed with his research, and we meet him just in time for him to show us a Riku who appears to have fallen back into darkness.
I bet that you had all but forgotten about me.
Are you crazy? Come on, I came all this way looking for you.
You don't care about me, just like you never cared. At all. About her feelings.
Naminé's?
I knew it. Never even gave it a thought, did you? Just 'cause you want to see Naminé. Sorry. Doesn't go both ways.
Riku.
Go home, Sora. I'll care for Naminé.
Sora is able to see through this and clues into the fact that Riku is being controlled by someone once more, keeping faith that his longtime friend Naminé hasn't rejected him, despite Riku's claim. Sora even quotes his promise to protect Naminé as proof that she would never want him to abandon her to her captors. But in a strange twist, Riku has the same memory of promising to protect Naminé on the night of a meteor shower, and a starry good luck charm that matches Sora's. It's obviously impossible for both Sora and Riku to share this same memory, and this serves as the first major clue to both us and audience members and the characters in the story that something sinister is going on with Sora's memories of Naminé. After Sora proceeds through a few more floors and defeats Riku on each, Vexen is tasked by Axel to take on Sora himself, supposedly to prove his value to the organization after his experiment failed, but mostly as a ploy by Axel to prove that he's loyal to Marluxia and Larxene and their coup. Vexen challenges Sora and refuses to hold back in their fight, leading Axel to convince Marluxia and Larxene that he poses a threat to their plans, and he happily follows their orders to take Vexen out, doing so in a genuinely disturbing scene that shows just how horrified Vexen is of his own mortality.
Axel!
No! Don't do it! We are just nobodies who have no one to be, yet we still are. But now you can be nothing instead of just being a nobody. You're off the hook. No! Please don't! I don't want it! Goodbye.
What are you? What are you people?
With Vexen out of the way and Axel's loyalty proven, Marluxia and Larxene let Axel into their inner circle, trusting him with their plans to use Sora to take over the organization. We continue with Sora as he explores Twilight Town, the only place he's been to in the castle so far that he doesn't recognize, despite Vexen telling him that it was constructed from memories that lie on the other side of his heart. What Vexen means here is left as a mystery for Kingdom Hearts 2 to answer, but for now what matters is that this town, Riku and Sora sharing the exact same memory, and Vexen warning Sora that he is on the path to becoming Marluxia's pawn just before he dies, has Donald and Goofy understandably worried about their friend. They ask Sora to slow down and think about everything they've learned and how suspicious their experiences have been, but Sora refuses to do so, and in a burst of seething anger, lashes out at his concerned friends and abandons them, pressing forward into the castle alone.
Think ahead. What is the matter with you guys? Do you want me to abandon her?
No, that's not it.
Then do whatever you want. You can lay back and take a nap for all I care. I'm going to find Naminé.
Sora!
At this point, Sora has become so obsessed with the idea of Naminé and with the idea of being reunited with a girl he may not have ever met that he can't even stop to listen to his friend's genuine worry and concern. The gaslighting he's received up to this point is so severe that he can't even perceive why anyone would want to get in the way of him rescuing Naminé and reuniting with her, even if all they want is for him to slow down and think about what's going on. I've been in Sora's shoes before. I've dove headlong into feelings for someone else, or worse, my idea of who someone else was, too many times to count. And when I did this, I pushed my friends and my chosen family to the side in order to spend all my free time and emotional energy on them. And it usually left me getting burned and lost when I realized they weren't who I thought they were in my head. Or something worse happened to leave me hurt and broken. So when I got to this moment in the game, it clicked for me that Chain of Memories' story is a metaphor for the experience of diving headlong into an abusive relationship, with Sora being gaslit by the organization into doing so. It's an incredibly solid and impactful metaphor, and it's also the perfect way to challenge a character like Sora, as his naive optimism and ever-present desire to help his friends makes him very susceptible to the organization turning those traits against him, even leading him to go so far as to abandon 2 friends to save another. After having isolated himself from the few sources of support he had, Sora heads into a recreation of Destiny Islands, where we see now the full effect of the organization's plan, as Sora's childhood memories have been completely rewritten, replacing Kairi with Naminé. The Naminé on this Destiny Island isn't the real Naminé though. She's an illusion of Naminé, constructed from Sora's implanted memories. But unlike the other illusions, this Naminé knows that she's not supposed to be on Destiny Islands with Sora, and the real Naminé shows up to break the spell Sora has been put under.
Naminé?
That isn't me. I'm not there. I don't really exist inside your heart. I don't exist in anyone's heart. I never have existed anywhere.
What are you saying? What's gotten into you? I know I've forgotten a lot of things in this castle, but never anything about you. What am I supposed to do?
Think, Sora. Think just one more time about who's most special to you. Call out to that piece of memory that glimmers faintly deep inside your heart. No matter how far away the light gets, your heart's voice will always reach it.
After Sora leaves Destiny Islands, we're confronted by Larxene again, and she finally reveals the full truth. The Riku that Sora has been fighting in Castle Oblivion hasn't been the real Riku, but a replica created by Vexen, whose memories of Sora and Naminé were implanted by Naminé. Naminé has also been the one erasing Sora's memories as he proceeded through the castle, and she's implanted false memories of herself in Kairi's place, both because of her own loneliness and desire to see Sora, and as part of Marluxia's plan to take control of Sora. This revelation that the memories of Naminé that he's uncovered have all been manufactured nearly breaks Sora, but he doesn't have to rely on his own strength to recover, as Donald and Goofy return just in time to save him, and give him the power to end Larxene for good. With Larxene out of the way, Naminé can finally explain her side of the story. She was a part of Marluxia's plan to take control of Sora, but only because Marluxia threatened to trap her in the castle and never allow her to see anyone outside of it if she didn't play along. She also blames herself for this in part though, because she desperately wanted to meet Sora, and believed that luring Sora to the castle like this was the only way to make that happen. But even after Naminé's confession, Sora doesn't want to see her blaming herself.
I'm so sorry.
Don't be. Please don't cry. I'm really not happy about you messing with my memories. But, you know, I can't really get mad at you for it either. These memories you gave me. In my head, I know they're lies. But they still feel right. Like the promise I made. I said I would protect you and that I wouldn't make you cry. Not ever. Naminé, if you cry now, I'll feel guilty, like I let you down. Until I get my memories back, smile and try to be happy. It's easier on me that way.
Sora.
Sora reacts exactly the way you'd expect someone as kind as him to. He completely understands the difficult position Naminé was put in, and even while he is upset over his lost memories, he's not upset at Naminé, who was simply doing what she had to as Marluxia's captive. Sora's compassion and understanding for Naminé here is just so touching, especially considering how easily he could pin all of the pain he's been through in Castle Oblivion on her. With Naminé rescued, we start to head towards the conclusion of the story, as Naminé tells Sora that if they can get to the 13th floor of the castle, she can restore his memories. As we make our way through the final floor, Sora, Donald, and Goofy all make a promise to be friends with each other, no matter what happens to their memories.
Whenever you make a promise that's super duper big, maybe it gives you the courage to face the scary stuff.
Courage.
Yeah, let's do it. Even if we get scared, or in trouble, or even if we get separated.
Or even if we sort of forget each other.
Whatever happens, we're friends.
All for one and one for all.
We also have one final encounter with Axel after this, as he has revealed himself to be a traitor to Marluxia by letting Naminé go free and tell the truth to Sora, but through a bit of unlucky timing and manipulation, he's pitted against Sora by Marluxia, which allows Marluxia to get away and capture Naminé in one final turn for the story. Once we've caught up with Marluxia in the penultimate room of the game, he makes one last move and orders Naminé to erase all of Sora's memories, an act which would completely destroy Sora's heart, and allow Marluxia to rebuild the Keyblade wielder from scratch. Naminé resists though, refusing to do any more harm to Sora, and just when it seems like she and Sora are done for, the Riku replica jumps at Marluxia, which allows the Riku replica to fulfill what has been his only real desire so far, to protect Naminé from harm. Once we've defeated a projection of Marluxia, Sora heads into the last room to finish him off, sealing the door behind him completely after his victory. It's with this that the Riku replica departs, still ultimately lost now after the realization that all of his memories were false, and in crisis over having nothing to truly call his own. But Sora ain't having none of that negative talk.
You are you, and nobody else. You have your own heart inside you. Those feelings and memories are yours, and yours alone. They're special.
Sora, you're a good guy. I don't have to be real to see how real your feelings are. That's good enough.
Even as the Riku replica leaves, it's clear that Sora's compassion for him has helped guide him, and that there is a chance that he may be able to find himself in the future thanks to the kindness that Sora showed. The very last moments of this story are of Naminé having a very difficult conversation with Sora, as she explains that there will be a consequence for restoring his and his friends' memories. Because of the way she dismantled their memories, by separating the links in their chain that connected one memory to another, the memories they had aren't gone, but simply trapped in their mind, disconnected. She can rebuild this chain of memories the same way she broke it apart. But as a consequence of this, the chain of memories Sora and his friends formed in Castle Oblivion will be broken, meaning that they won't remember anything about their time here, and most importantly, anything about their new friend, Naminé. The choice Sora has to make here is massive, but even as reluctant as he is to lose the memory of his new friend, he knows that the only choice he can sincerely make without ever having regrets is to be made like he was, at the cost of his newly formed memories and friendship. To say that this hurts Naminé, though, a girl whose only real relationships with others was being abused and manipulated by the organization and longing to see Sora, whom she'd never even met, would be an understatement.
Make me like I was.
Oh, okay. Nobody needs to keep a bunch of memories that aren't real, right? You want to remember all of the people who are really important to you. Anybody would choose that.
The response Naminé gives here is passive-aggressive, self-deprecating, and manipulative. I struggled for a good while trying to parse just how I felt about it, because we hear this from Naminé so late in the game that there's not really any attempt to deal with what it means. And the fact that the idea that she doesn't matter goes unchallenged puts a bit of a sour taste in my mouth, as does the fact that this manipulative statement is a smaller, less pronounced version of the emotional abuse Sora has been put through by the organization all throughout this game. And Naminé matters. Absolutely. And seeing her act like this, when the actions she took against Sora were the only actions she could take to stay alive and be safe, plays into the idea that she was just as guilty of abusing him in a really uncomfortable and strange way. I think I'm okay with that though. For one, Sora has shown through his actions already that Naminé matters, both to him and to his friends, and while it's definitely a bit messed up of her to make such a manipulative statement so close to the end of their journey, I think it shows her imperfections in a really interesting way. Naminé has spent all of her life with only the people of the organization to look up to, and their constant infighting, betrayal, and scheming has left her with very little in the way of role models for interpersonal relationships. It makes sense then that she still wouldn't be able to perfectly handle doing the right thing and accepting Sora's decision without putting herself down or putting the burden of that decision on Sora. She still ultimately, though, is going to accept Sora's decision and restore his memories exactly the way they were, just like he wants. And that more than atones for the bad reaction. And eventually, Naminé will also learn to believe that she matters, and that it doesn't matter whether anyone else thinks she does or not. With that, Naminé leads Sora to the sleeping pod, where he will rest while she restores his memories, and Sora, always the kindest person, resolves to make sure that he doesn't forget to thank Naminé after he's done, by having Jiminy write a reminder in his journal for after his memory is restored. Naminé leaves Sora with the knowledge that he can always find his way in life by focusing on the person who means the most to him, and she closes the pod on Sora, leaving him to dream of Kairi until her long work is finally done.
She sat up from her desk, pleased with the work she had done, and closed her laptop. That just about covers everything, she thought, but a prickle at the back of her mind kept her from feeling fully at peace with what she had written. And then she remembered there was a second half of the game she hadn't mentioned at all.
So, there's a whole other campaign in this game where you play as Riku, as he proceeds up the basement levels of Castle Oblivion. It's kind of tacked on, but it's also kind of brilliant. The main thing Riku's campaign has to offer, gameplay-wise, is a really unique twist on Chain of Memories mechanics. In Riku's campaign, you're given pre-built decks of basic attack cards and are forced to work with a new deck every time you ascend a floor of the castle. And as counterintuitive as it might sound to force a player to work with a pre-built deck, in a game so focused on the fun of deck building, it ends up being a pretty great twist because of the introduction of two new mechanics, duels and dark mode. Duels themselves are pretty simple. If you play a card with the same value as an enemy's card, time stops and you can press triangle to initiate a duel, where if you can break every card the enemy presents, you'll do a powerful attack against them and any other enemies who happen to get caught in the blast. Dark mode is a bit more complex, but also way more interesting. Each time you break an enemy card as Riku, you'll earn dark points based on how quickly you broke the card. And if you hit 30 points in a single battle, Riku will call on the power of darkness and transform, boosting his base stats and giving him access to a number of powerful slides that wreak havoc on his enemies. Add both of these mechanics on to the fact that Riku doesn't have access to any slides on his own, and you're incentivized to play this game in a way that's far more focused on in-the-moment strategy and reactive thinking than Sora's campaign, where all the strategy came from deck building and planning for each battle. Riku's campaign is far from perfect though, and its biggest weaknesses are also the sides that point to it being simply tacked on at the end, without much real thought. Unlike in Sora's campaign, where with each floor and Disney World you visit, you get to see a short story play out that's at least competently executed, in Riku's campaign, every floor and world you visit is completely empty, outside of a boss fight against the Disney villain of that world. It's narratively justified. It's explained early on that Riku will only meet people shrouded by darkness on each floor, but justified or not, it ends up making each world feel empty, and empty in a way that doesn't add any meaning to the story. The worst part, though, is that there's actually a relatively clear model for how this emptiness could be made meaningful, and it's in the very first world, no less. The first place Riku revisits is Hollow Bastion, and we're shown 2 scenes with Riku exploring the empty castle he would have called home in Kingdom Hearts 1, before he comes face to face with Maleficent and rejects her and her obsession with dark power. A similar approach would absolutely have worked in the other worlds as well. Either have Riku explore these locations on his own and show us how he feels about revisiting these places where he served the dark, or have him follow along with the Disney villain, countering, challenging, and learning from them as he goes. Both approaches would have worked on different levels for each Disney world, and mixing it up between the two would have added some variety into the stories of each world without sacrificing the loneliness Riku is meant to feel as he explores Castle Oblivion. Despite its weaknesses in the Disney worlds though, Riku's story overall is actually pretty damn excellent, as it deals with the consequences of Riku's redemption from the dark, picking up exactly where he was left at the end of Kingdom Hearts 1.
Stay asleep.
Who's there?
You should remain asleep. Here, between light and dark.
Between what?
You did not have the strength to overcome the darkness. Or maybe you were close to it. Here, blanketed by the darkness, sleep is safety. Sleep is eternal. But take it and your sleep ends as you take the first step toward the truth. But know this, the truth will bring you pain. Will you still go? There is no return to the security of sleep.
This seemed like a boring place to take a nap anyway.
After Riku symbolically wakes up and explores the empty halls of Hollow Bastion, he seemingly uncovers the identity of the mysterious voice that's been speaking to him. It is Ansem, who still resides in the darkness lingering in his heart. Ansem represents the worst aspects of Riku's darkness, the part that made him betray his friends, that caused him to lash out at Sora, and the part that led him to surrender control of his very self in order to gain more power. And it's made clear early on that Riku's ultimate battle here will be against Ansem and the worst parts of himself that Ansem represents. Riku's story is much shorter than Sora's in this regard, since there's no major twist or mystery to uncover, but the way it gets Riku to a place where he's ready to fight Ansem is really interesting. Riku meets his replica early on, and in this mirror image of himself, sees the kind of selfish, unthinking person he could be if he gave into his own darkness. Yet, even as the replica Riku is used as a foil for Riku, he's still given agency for himself, as we see him struggle against Vexen and Larxene when they threaten to wipe away his memories and use him as a tool against Sora. Replica Riku isn't strong enough to resist them, though, and ends up transformed into a nearly perfect copy of Riku, only devoted to Naminé, until his crisis late in Sora's story. Meanwhile, Riku himself struggles against the temptation to use the dark power inside of him, and eventually, after being nearly defeated by Lexaeus, a powerful member of the organization, he finally gives in, and with his dark power, defeats him in a single blow. Riku's surrender to the dark here allows Ansem to take control of him and pull him into a deep realm of darkness, but Mickey, whose spirit has been with Riku throughout his journey in the castle, pulls him out of the dark, freeing him from Ansem's grip for now. The organization is on the move against Riku though, and not long after, he meets Zexion, who gives him a card to visit Destiny Islands, his home. This island is just as barren and empty as the other worlds we've visited, but unlike the others, Riku gets a short glimpse of his old friends from the island, before they disappear in front of his eyes, which adds a lot of emotional context to Riku coming back to his childhood home. When we meet up with Zexion again, he explains that Riku can't visit his friends in this world because he cast them aside for the power of darkness and ended up destroying his own home as a result. With that failure fresh in his mind, Zexion calls forth an image of Sora to confront Riku, who uses his Keyblade to trap Riku in an empty realm of light.
I'm fading. Fading away into the light.
You won't fade. You can't fade. There's no power that can defeat you. Not the light, not the dark. So don't run from the light, and don't fear the darkness, because both will make you stronger.
All this time I've tried to push the darkness away.
You've got to just remember to be brave. Know that the darkness is there and don't give in. If you do that, you will gain strength. The kind that's unlike any other. You'll be able to escape the deepest darkness.
And I'll be able to see through the brightest light. Darkness!
Impossible!
So, in my last video, I made the observation that in Kingdom Hearts, one of the clearest interpretations for darkness was that it represented the negative thoughts and feelings that come as a result of suffering from mental illness, specifically the self-loathing and insecurity that come from anxiety and depression. And with this turn in Riku's story, we can see that subtext taken to its next logical conclusion. Darkness, and all it represents, is not inherently evil. It's possible to live with darkness inside your heart and not be led astray by it. And it's also possible to be made stronger by accepting your own darkness and learning to not be afraid of it. With this revelation, Riku is finally ready to face Ansem, as he's overcome the doubts brought by the lingering darkness in his heart. Before we can move on to the final fight with Ansem though, there are a few loose ends that need to be tied up. With Zexion near death, Axel has the replica Riku absorb his power, and sets the replica off against the original Riku, telling him that defeating his original will help him overcome his identity crisis. Ansem inside Riku also reasserts himself, attempting to take over Riku once more, as he still has a way in through Riku's darkness. But Riku is saved once again by Mickey, who has come to Castle Oblivion in the flesh to help out his friend. Shortly after this, Riku meets a man named Diz, who reveals himself as the one who spoke to and saved Riku when he was trapped in the realm of darkness, promising to explain more after Riku has met and spoken to Naminé. We encounter the replica Riku before this though, and see that his identity crisis has pushed him to the brink. He believes that as long as the original Riku exists, he'll never be a full person, and tries to take Riku down. He's no match for the original Riku though, and after being defeated, he accepts his death, as a good end to what he feels has been a phony life.
What happens when a fake dies? One like me. Where will my heart go? Does it disappear? It'll go somewhere. Maybe to the same place as mine. A faithful replica until the very end. That's okay.
Replica Riku introduces another long-running theme into the Kingdom Hearts series, about the nature of personhood, and who gets to qualify as a real person. And with Replica Riku, a completely artificial person, whose memories aren't even real, it's made clear that despite how the members of the organization treat him, he is his own full person, with agency, emotions, and unique desires. He and Riku are far from the same person, no matter how much they have in common. And even if Replica Riku only finds the dignity in himself through his peaceful acceptance of death, that dignity was always there to begin with. With those loose ends wrapped up, Riku is finally able to meet and speak to Naminé, who tells him of Sora's journey through the castle, and offers Riku a choice himself. With her powers, she can lock away Ansem from Riku, making it so he will never have to worry about him taking control of him. But if she does this, then he, like Sora, will lose some of his memory and have to be asleep for a while. Riku rejects her offer, fully determined to defeat Ansem with his own strength. He even refuses Mickey's help in the battle, asking Mickey only to destroy him if he loses the fight and is taken over by Ansem, though Mickey refuses to accept such a fate, promising to save Riku once again if anything goes wrong, and ultimately fulfilling that promise when he pulls Riku out of the dark abyss Ansem drags him into as a last resort at the end of their battle. With Ansem defeated, and only existing as a faint whisper inside Riku's heart, Riku departs from Castle Oblivion with Mickey, planning to walk the road to dawn between both the dark and light, and ready to explore what accepting the presence of both light and darkness means for him. It's a bit of a melancholy end, as Riku refuses to go home due to the small presence of Ansem in his heart, but is still an ultimately satisfying end, especially since it perfectly builds into the way Riku's character is explored and developed in future games. There are a few more additional details I glossed over in Riku's story, namely the way it explores Zexion's and Lexaeus' relationship to the organization, and the lack of chaos in their dealings with it compared to the members in Sora's campaign, as well as the hints that Ansem is connected in some way to their leader. There's also Naminé's revelation that she's the shadow of Kairi, and a mystery established around Diz, who Mickey believes he may have met before, but doesn't know when. These are all questions that will be addressed in Kingdom Hearts 2 though, and they're better discussed in the context of that game when we can actually dive into what they mean, what they say about the characters. I will say though that these are pretty compelling mysteries, and while it's been a while since I've not known the answers to them, I still feel like they'd have me chomping at the bit for more. More important than that though, I want to say that I feel like Chain of Memories represents everything about Kingdom Hearts that I love, more so than any other game. Its deeply character-focused story really does a lot to challenge both of its protagonists. Its villains are really fun and memorable, and its design is incredibly bold and experimental, despite its failings and imperfections. It set the precedent for these games being willing to play around with their mechanics just as much as they played around with story ideas, characters, and themes. And even with the ways this game's mechanics fail, they still bring about something maddeningly brilliant when they do work. I doubt there's a single other JRPG out there that's designed in such a way that you can wipe the floor with enemies like a late game character by the time you hit level 10, or another action game that attempts to implement deck building and collectible card game mechanics into its real-time combat. And no matter how you feel about the game's mechanics, the way this game's story definitely tackles the subjects of emotional abuse, gaslighting, and the acceptance of mental illness make it incredibly meaningful. If you've never played through Chain of Memories, I think you owe it to yourself to at least give it a shot, because, and this is a Jacqueline Merritt guarantee, it's worth your time. Well, that was a long time coming. Thank you everyone so much for watching. I appreciate you sticking with me and waiting for this video to come out. Your patience has been much appreciated because it's allowed me the time to work on this video in the way that I want to, and to not feel pressure to push it out before I feel like it's done and I'm able to give it the love and attention it deserves. If you want to help make more content like this possible, you can support me on Patreon with a monthly donation, which really helps, or you can give me a one-time donation through PayPal, both of which have links that I'll be scrolling up on the screen. I really mean it when I say that these videos are possible thanks to the generous donations you all have been able to give me and my partner in order to help us make it through this capitalist hellscape as two disabled, very queer people in need of a lot of support. I also want to give a big thanks to Ether for doing a beta read of this script, and Gemmacat for doing a beta read of this script in a much earlier phase. Also, a big shout out and thank you to my wonderful partner, Julian Merritt, for providing the voice of Aerith, and a similar thank you to Max Mariner for providing the voice of Sora. And finally, thank you Sarah Zedig for providing the voice of the narrator in the little intermission. I hope that you will like, share, comment, and subscribe, because that'll help this channel. Thank you again for your patience, for watching, and I just want to tell every single one of you out there, I love you. Bye.